Hi everyone, I hope your final prep and final work is going well and it is going strong. I want to welcome you to my presentation of Crash and its many adaptations. Now, before I begin, I would like to offer a disclaimer about my content and some of the passages I selected. I want to remind you that this presentation does not reflect me as a person, and it doesn't represent my views and value. Everything that I chose is included for a special reason because it highlights the information I'm trying to get across in a very academic way. So, before I begin, I'd like to give a brief background on J.G. Ballard, the man behind Crash. He was a science fiction writer who is very important in the new wave because he deliberately obscured features of the dynamic between body / mind and machine. He uses the motor car as a shadow version of kinds of narratives of like trans and post-human cybernetic liberation that are explored and developed in Donna Haraway's writing. You remember Cyborg Manifesto. So it's important to address this because it shows this and it highlights human interaction with technology and creation. It's kept out of sight either deliberately or merely as a function of the differential placements of attention. However, J.G. Ballard died at 78 in 2009, and I actually have a really weird theory that before he died, he was working on another adaptation, because think of our technological advancements today, and I feel like Ballard would have had a heyday with the use of cell phones, how with one click of a button we could have exactly what was put in Crash. But I just wondered if he could write another adaptation, what would he include today? Like, what lines would he cross then? So, just some food for thought to think while I am continuing with my presentation. For those who need a reminder for Crash, who have tucked the book from their memory, Crash is told through the eyes of James Ballard, who meets a man named Vaughn, who is obsessed with car crashes after experiencing his own crash. James becomes close to this man and joins him as he chases after car crashes. While he does this, James becomes obsessed too, allowing everything in his life to be affected by car crashes, like his marriage, extramarital affairs, and his own regards for his life. As Vaughn's behavior escalates, James stays by his side, waiting to feel more alive like he does near a car crash. Crash is a very unique and important novel in which it shows the effects of modern technology on human relationships, body, and mind. The novel leaves you wondering just how far are humans willing to go to satisfy obsession. And the movie that I will be looking at in comparison does a very good job of showing Ballard's vision. It's hard to decide if it does better or if it does worse. You kind of have to watch it to understand what I mean by that. Through the many adaptations, Ballard was subverting social norms by the collision of sex and technology. During the 1970s, when the novel was written, horrific or sexual images could not be found by the click of a button, and the audience was more sensitized, making the novel more taboo, even though it shed light on the idea of human viewpoints of death and the tendency to eroticize and romanticize danger. Literary theorist John Farrow claims humans are masters in the art of adaptation, since no idea is completely unique. This idea explains how anything created must have a predecessor or a source of influence. I mean, come on, you didn't think William Shakespeare thought of all of his canon work by himself. There's even linkage that shows that the bard found his plots from someone else. This idea for details can be seen inside Crash Adaptations. Ballard's primary text is the short story Crash, which was later included as a chapter of the Atrocity exhibition in 1970. Crash was then made into a short film of the same name in 1971, directed by Harley Cockless, which starred Ballard himself. After this short film, Ballard finally wrote the novel Crash in 1973. Because of these movements of adaptation, it shows the novel itself as an adaptation, unlike the hypotext it becomes in regard to the movie Crash in 1996, written by David Cronenberg. In comparing the movie Crash to the novel, one isn't only looking at the evolution of the work, but seeing and understanding where the movie is an adaptation of an adaptation. This is significant because it shows the importance of adaptation as a process and as a method of creating art. Ballard was one of the first science fiction authors to attempt the new style of writing, beginning with the world of Crash, even before the release of Crash. As the text on the screen shows, he was playing with the idea even before his first stage of the writing process. Simon Ford stated, in May 1968, Ballard was planning, along with Eduardo Paluzzi and the psychologist Dr. Christopher Evans, to produce a play at the Institute of Contemporary Arts entitled Crash, featuring car crash. However, this idea was never put into works, making Ballard look into his own writing for the process of Crash. Just 1 year later, he published the short story Crash in 1969. This begins the focus of the collision of sex and technology. However, it is more than Ballard who was interested in the unique storyline. Since the release of Crash in 1969, the primary text has been adapted 4 times. With Crash being the original text, one can see the change, growth, and additions added to the story through our adaptation. Crash was originally published in Evanston magazine, but was soon added to Ballard's The Atrocity of Exhibition, which represents a kind of adaptation of the story into the larger context of an individual's inner world. The text features the main character from The Atrocity of Exhibition, Talis, and is a run of Talis' mind almost to the point of no separation of the mind and the outside world. Like Crash, it is a psychological science fiction piece focusing on normal life. The short story explores how celebrities who die in car crashes can become the focus of sexual pleasure. The short story also explains how relatives who lose loved ones to car crashes revisit the wreckage site and have an uptick in sexual activities. This idea is reminiscent of the novel, but it was not quite developed yet. With Crash being a short story, it was hard for Ballard to put as much information as he would have liked into such a condensed space, leaving it to the reader to create what happened. The text shown explains how his experimental piece is a condensed one. Ballard explained how his experimental piece is considered a condensed novel that is provocative and a surreal compilation of social observations, disconnected narratives, and political commentary. Around the same time Ballard included Crash into the Atrocity of Exhibition, he released an exhibit in London titled Crash Cars. Ballard obviously understood the future of technology and how it would help shape human lives. He spent his life adapting his ideas into different formats. Like his short story, the exhibit would be even more condensed, causing the viewers to have to look at the silent, dented vehicle and wonder what happened. This would cause the audience to work for the narrative and use their minds to build scenarios for what happened. This exhibit also spoke to society differences by showing different makes of cars divided by class. However, it's because of the narrativity or lack thereof that led Harley Cockless to expand the story into a more structured plot in the short film Crash. The short film includes crashed vehicles in a junkyard while J.G. Ballard's voiceover moves with the clips. That is one instrumental part to the short film that no other adaptation has, and it's one that is a very important move on the director's part. So Ballard wrote the screenplay, and he had his own thoughts on the collision. He is stated as saying, "I think the key image of the 20th century is the man in the motor car. It sums up everything, the elements of speed, drama, aggression, the junction of advertising and consumer goods with the technological landscape. The sense of violence and desire, power and energy, the shared experience of moving together through an elaborately signaled landscape. I'm interested in the automobile as a narrative structure, as a scenario that describes our real lives and our real fantasies." This commentary provides background on his thought process surrounding the central point, car crashes. As the short story moved the plot further along by introducing Vaughn, audiences can see he is originally attracted to the body and make of the cars, soon enough becoming an obsession. Yet this is only the beginning, as Vaughn soon wants more through the act of unification of machine and sex. Ballard soon explores sexuality and gender by including sexual connotations with the crashed car and the injured female. The straightforward plot and characters gives the novel an ability to reach all audiences, but what makes it the most interesting is the use of the author's name for the main character, which is James Ballard. As the text illustrates on the screen, J.G. Ballard, the author, explores how Crash is actually one of his most autobiographical novels. Because of the creative choice to use his own name, readers and reviewers took the book too seriously, and even some claiming that J.G. Ballard needed psychiatric help. Ballard is blurring the lines between himself and his narrative. Because of the blurred lines, audiences can see more of Ballard's creative ideas rather than the basis of facts presumed by the use of his name. However, he contradicts himself by publishing different interviews where he goes back on saying that the book is science fiction, and he seems to do this when the text is being criticized and he wants to soften the blow. Sex is formally introduced in Chapter 2 when James has a head-on collision with Helen and her husband's car. For the sake of avoiding confusion, James will now refer to the book character only, and Ballard will refer to the author, J.G. Ballard. As the screen shows, when James and Helen were pulled from the wreckage, he has his first sexual moment, and the way that it is written is done in a very cold manner, almost as if Ballard was trying to make a separation from feelings by making it seem less sexual. This can be further explained when James is rescued from his car. He comments, "If one of the firemen had unbuttoned his coarse serge trouser to reveal his genitals and pressed his penis into the bloody crotch of my armpit, even the bizarre act would have been acceptable in terms of the stylization of violence and rescue." As James is surrounded by an unreal situation, he pictures this extreme and crazy action, but weirdly enough, it highlights hidden sexual desire. Most of these hidden desires are hidden by normal people who would find it odd, and no people would comment on it, as such, as shown before when I mentioned how a publisher had actually told Ballard that he needed psychiatric help. However, these following lines that I have illustrated show the idea that Ballard was willing to obscure the lines of moral boundaries, and through the examples, it shows exactly what he intended to do, which is invent the reality. Ballard is using Crash to persuade people to get past controversy and see the book for what it is, and that is art. So as the previous slide mentioned, Ballard uses Crash to defamiliarize the body and open the world up to possibilities. He uses Crash as their awakening. One of the most common connections is the tone from the novel to the movie. The tones are very cold and monotone. The scene shown on the slide is James and Catherine Ballard talking and sharing notes on their extramarital excursions. Yet, while listening, you notice how cold they are. When you rewatch it and look further in, you can actually see that they're doing this not because they aren't interested in each other, but because they are. They're doing this to heighten their sexual lives. They like to share their same interests, and in this instance, they're talking about having sex in a public place with other people. One of the things that was very downplayed in the book from the novel was actually Catherine, whereas her affairs were talked about over the course of the novel. She's just kind of forgotten in the movie, and she's not really brought back up until the scene where she's having sex with Vaughn in the back of the car while her own husband drives. The text that I've included on this slide is from the very last scene of the movie. As a way for James to save his marriage, he brings Catherine in, and both the endings of the novel and the book end it with, like, they're not finished and you want to know what's next. But the difference between the two is the movie ends with Catherine's own car crash and James planning his own. When Catherine crashes, James finds her still alive and he whispers to her, maybe next time, and then proceeds to have sex with her, while her face looks of shock and like she's trying to make sense of why she's alive. Cronenberg designed the movie to be aesthetically unappealing, yet sexualized in a way that allowed audiences to see inside the characters' imaginations. This movie is an adaptation that makes changes that may or may not have improved the original. The ending of the movie is one that is a change in favor of the movement, but everyone has their own opinion on the matter. Some last-minute thoughts is about the logic and state of desire that Ballard tries to get across in the novel. This is actually where I feel like the director Cronenberg does better in the movie. During the scene after Vaughn has had sex with Catherine, James and Catherine are lying in bed, and it appears like Catherine is placed in a specific way on purpose. She almost looks like she's like a dead body because she looks like she's like really pale and not. Her face is just numb, and she's just there, and it gives her a very ghoulish form to her erotic pose. And I feel like Cronenberg does this very well because he relies very well on the effects and the pacing of the movie with whispered dialogue, and he uses very interesting music that highlights what's going on, and he like alienates the movie with the camera, and he does this by dwelling on the said body, as I mentioned earlier, of Catherine. And I feel like he's able to, in this instance, better highlight what J.G. Ballard is trying to say. So, by showing the adaptation process, I highlight how it's a moving process and a method for creating art. I also show how the movie works with the text to bring out Ballard's ideas that would otherwise be lost on the page. This is my Works Consulted page, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to let me know.